right, welcome back to part two. And it's hard to discuss, or if not impossible to discuss, the rise in globalization without mentioning this image that you see, the shipping container. Um, Probably most of you have seen one of these around there all over the world. This has revolutionized the world when it comes to globalization and shipping, mainly because one, these are all standard sizes. Any one of these you see, they're all made to be the same width, height, and length. And you can load pretty much anything you want in these. They're big enough to actually hold a car. But the reason that they're all the same length and width is that you can take these off and on the back of trucks. So you can fill this up, put it on a tractor trailer, and drive it down. You can drive to a rail yard and stack them on trains. And if you get to the edge of a continent, you get to a city or a port, you can stack them on a boat. And these are very easy to unload. It's like basically Legos, right? So you can ship things around the world. In fact, the largest ports in the world today are container ports. The size of these squares on this slide indicates how many tons of cargo they ship every year. And the largest port in the world is Singapore, right here. And the second largest one is Shanghai in China. Underneath here, you can't tell, the third largest is Hong Kong. So you can see here that in Asia, China, Singapore, Tokyo, all these ports here, the largest ports in the world. And if you think about the manufactured goods that you own, you probably have at least 3 or 4 things that were made in China, like your iPhone or your TV or the clothing that you wear. And so they're shipped. The container has allowed the cost of shipping to drop by over 900% since they were first introduced about 30 years ago. Before this, when things were shipped in different sized boxes, think about if you've ever moved before from apartment to apartment, right? All these different sized boxes, you've got to move them individually. Some are large, some are small, and you have to kind of load them onto a truck. With the shipping container, you load the shipping container once, and then you put the container on a truck. You can move from a truck to a boat or a boat to a train very easily. So it makes it much easier and faster to ship things. I'm going to show you a video in a little bit that shows you one of these container ships, which are the largest boats in the world. But because of all the cargo that is shipped around the world from Asia to Europe and the United States, these boats are huge. And harbors now have to be much bigger and located in deeper water. These boats need a lot of water to float in. One of the things that's actually done is you've seen smaller ports that are in shallower waters decline in usage. So right here where the mouse is hovering, that is where New Orleans, Louisiana used to be, which is still a very busy port, but it used to be much bigger. But the problem now is that it is about 20 miles from the mouth of the Mississippi River. And so it's very shallow and hard for those boats to get there. Instead, they'll dock in New York, which is right on the ocean, or Los Angeles. So I'm going to show you a video about this, the world's largest container ship. All right, so this video is only a few years old, and this comes from the BBC. And this is a video that is the world's largest container ship. So before I start, I just want to point out that all those individual things you see are shipping containers.
Basically, we are chasing down the world's largest container ship, which is on its way to dock in the UK for the first time at Felixstowe. Just look at that. It's a wall of steel in the middle of the ocean. It's awesome to look at. That is how so much of what we have arrives in the UK. That is globalization. The clothes we're wearing, the food we're eating, probably the computer you might be watching this on now, arrived that way. Around 19,100 containers are on board. They're going to offload and load up around 7,000 at Felixstowe, which is near their record. So we go along the side of it, it's 400 meters long. What's that, about 1,300 feet?
I just want to point that out. This thing is 1,300 feet long. That's as tall as the Sears Tower, laid down, if it was on its side.
Hard to gauge how high it is out of the water. It's like being next to a building. We're doing about 8 knots at the moment. We put the pilots on board. There's a little hatch we're going to come up to in a second. That's how the pilots get on board. They're delighted because normally they have to climb up a rope ladder when they're bringing ships in, so this is a nice easy way to get in. Only has 20 to 30 people on board, 20 to 30 crew. Coming up here.
Notice that its home port is Hong Kong.
You might be able to see where the lifeboat is. And then you'll see the bridge. If Peter the cameraman could hold on. We are harnessed on, by the way. The crew quarters kind of in there. Absolutely awesome sight. Safely docked now. The process starts of offloading 4,000 containers and then putting 3,000 containers back on again. It might be the world's largest container ship, but you still steer it like a mini metro. It's got all the other things you would expect as well. A compass, dead slow stop, telling the engine room what to do. But it's out here where the real action is going on. Now this is not a place you want to go if you suffer from any kind of fear of heights. Just have a look down here. You can see how the containers are stacked up all the way up the deck. There's the bottom deck down there. But it's over here where the real action is going on. The whole point of this ship, shifting containers around the world.
And so you can see right there, they're going to pick up that container on these big, huge blue cranes and then transfer it either to a truck or a train. So that is globalization in a nutshell.
It's a little bit...
So the other aspect of global trade and space-time convergence is air transport. And we've seen this increase dramatically since the 1950s. It is the fastest way to ship goods. It's also the most expensive way. So therefore, it's best for people and also for things that are highly valuable or perishable. So a great example I always talk about is sushi. So sushi, the best sushi comes from fish that are caught in the Pacific Ocean. But the problem with sushi is, to be good sushi, the fish has never been frozen. That would ruin the flavor. And so how do you get fresh fish from the middle of the Pacific Ocean to Chicago in 2 or 3 days without it rotting? You put it on an airplane. And there are huge cargo planes that land at O'Hare Airport. If you go to O'Hare Airport, where we get on the plane, that's the north side of the airport. The south side of the airport, if you've ever driven past it on the tollway, all these big, huge warehouses, it's a huge cargo loading zone as well. And this is how FedEx actually made their money and became one of the biggest shipping companies in the world. FedEx started off like every other shipping company with trucks and people delivering this, but they made their money by air freight. Their slogan used to be, when it absolutely positively has to be there overnight. And back in the ancient 1980s, most things were not shipped that fast unless you wanted to really pay a lot of money for it. If you needed something shipped overnight, maybe there was a contract that someone had to sign. Something that was very expensive and very time sensitive, you would pay FedEx, and they had a fleet of planes, and they still do. And so they actually ship everything, their really, really fast items, on airplanes. So I'm going to show you another video. And by the way, I'm also going to make these videos available for you to watch as links on D2L. But this talks about how FedEx works, how they ship everything out of their office or their main headquarters.
Right now we're in the Memphis World Hub. The complex is huge. It's like a small city. It's over 880 acres. We have parking for in excess of 165 aircraft. We'll do about 150 flights in and out every night. We'll do about 90 during the day.
So think about that, 150 flights every night and about 90 during the day. So about 250 flights a day. And I don't know if I mentioned it, this is the airport in Memphis, Tennessee.
We have the capacity here at the hub to land an aircraft about every 40 seconds. From the hours of 10 o'clock at night till about 4 in the morning. This is the busiest airport in the world.
We've got 2 sorts. The day sort averages anywhere from 500 to 600,000 packages. And then, of course, we've got our huge night sort. And at night, we average over 1.3 million packages.
Throughout the hub, we have over 80 miles of conveyor belt. and working the sorts, we have 10,000 people. The action is amazing. Once a plane lands at the hub, we immediately begin to offload it. The size of these aircraft, they're enormous, with thousands and thousands of packages on each one. And within half an hour, we have it into the belt system.
Once it gets on that conveyor belt system, we've got a team there that makes sure the label is facing up where it can be read by one of our light scanners.
We capture all the information that's embedded in that barcode about that package. So exactly where it's going, we're going to grab the dimensions of that package, the weight of that package.
Once that package leaves that light curtain, there are arms that automatically push your package to the correct destination, where we've got team members ready to reload it and put it back into a container. We've also got our small package sort system. That's where all of your letters, your small boxes are sent. Once the labels are faced up, it's put on a conveyor belt. It reaches a point where it hits a tray. It also goes to one of our scanners. Once it goes to one of our scanners, based upon the location that it's going to, that tray drops it into its correct bag. Your package can come into the hub and back out within 15 minutes.
Because of FedEx, these days we do a one-click order online, it's at our house the next day. But it's not magic. We have an army of people, we have all this technology that comes together to make that transaction seamless.
When you're standing in the hub and you're looking down, it's an out-of-world experience. It's a sci-fi movie.
Just to think that you could stand and see a million of anything fly by you, it's just cool.
Being a part.
I'm going to pause this right here and just mention, so how does this work, right? In case you're not sure, right? If something is shipped overnight, and this is why it costs more money usually for overnight shipping, right? You pay for the shipping, so that day it gets to an airport by 5 or 6 o'clock, no matter where you are, any nearby airport. And some airports are busier than others. And if your airport isn't as busy, it costs a little bit more. But all those planes are loaded around the country, and they all fly to Memphis. Or they have a flight that maybe is passengers, and in that flight, some of the luggage is cargo that goes to FedEx. And so it all arrives in Memphis and is put into this big, huge computerized sorting system, and then it's loaded onto a plane that flies to the destination. So basically, if you ship something from FedEx overnight, it will stop in Memphis to change planes. And that way, with the use of just 2 planes and then trucks at either end, you can pretty much ship around the country overnight. Now today, as he said, this has gotten so efficient. They've been able to lower the cost so much that oftentimes now you can order something, click on it, and get it within 1 or 2 days. Where 10 years ago, that would have cost you almost as much for the shipping, if not more, than what you bought. So again, this is an example of technology making space-time even smaller. By the way, Memphis, the airport in Memphis, is not very busy except for FedEx. It's probably less busy than the airport in Milwaukee, Wisconsin when it comes to people. But FedEx is easily more than half of the total movement of planes. So we can go even one step further with the speed and movement, and then we can talk about the movement of not only goods and people, but ideas. So as an economy matures, and we've talked about this, right, in a service economy, which is a mature economy, we don't so much make physical things like cars or trucks, but we deal in things you can't touch, like money or information or expertise, right? You're selling a service, not a good. And when it comes to the idea of space-time convergence, in that kind of economy, a service economy, it's the flow of information that is important. So let's use our class as an example, right? We are a mature economy, and now we've all moved online for various reasons. So we are exchanging information with each other, right? I am giving you this lecture, I'm giving you the materials, and in exchange, you are giving me your learning. You're taking your test and doing your assignments. And so that is almost as important, in fact, it is as important, as you maybe 10 years ago giving me pieces of paper with your information on it and taking quizzes. We're exchanging information. But because of technology, right, can you imagine trying to do this type of class 10, 15 years ago? Most people didn't have the fast enough internet speed to host these kind of things. Most people didn't have a computer, let alone a phone, that had a video camera and microphone built into it. And that's now commonplace. So as technology has increased, it's made it easier and more affordable to exchange data. So let's talk about the idea of long distance. Most of you probably don't even worry about when you call on your phone, you can call pretty much any number in the country for the same cost. But it wasn't that long ago that the joke was you have to wait till after 8 to call long distance. Back before cell phones, when everyone had landlines, my grandmother lived 45 minutes away, but that was long distance. If we called her, it cost an extra charge per minute. And since the 1980s, the cost per minute to talk on a phone has declined, so much so that most people now have unlimited minutes on their phones. They can talk as long as they want, and the cost is the same. The technology has increased where they don't need to charge as much to use the phones for talking. And we can go even one step further and think about data. Now, it's not uncommon to have a mobile device like an iPhone or a tablet that uses Wi-Fi or 4 or 5G internet coverage, and you don't have to pay per gig of data, an unlimited data plan. Whereas there are still some plans where you pay for how much data you have. But generally speaking, the costs have gone down. So this has happened with all sorts of devices, in telephones and in internet speeds. And as this happens, right, it becomes more available for new technology. So if you were trying to lead a life online 10, 15 years ago, like we are today, where you do classes online and you order through a online based food app, all of these things, right? That wouldn't happen. It would be too expensive. But as technology increases the ability to do these things at a more affordable cost, it creates new economic geographies. And another example, think about the gig economy, the ride share economy, people that drive for Lyft or Uber. 10 years ago, the ability to use a phone to connect on the internet to this large corporation to find you a ride, it didn't exist. Now, I mean, if you want to ride on Lyft or Uber, you pull out your phone, you open up the app, you say, I want to ride, and the app connects to a large mainframe data system that finds the nearest available driver, tells them where to go. You get in the car, they take you where you want to go, and then when you're done, your banking information is used to route money to their account. And so this takes a lot of data. You need to have a small, portable, fast handheld device to keep up, to do the mapping, do the charting. 10, 15 years ago, this didn't exist. So that type of economy didn't exist. But now, many people drive part-time and Lyft, so much so that local taxi drivers have seen their share of rides decrease in Chicago by 50%. It's changed that market economy totally. So with globalization, we are currently in what we're going to talk about the third wave. But the first wave of globalization we talked about a little bit before in 1492, when Europeans finally connect to the Americas on a permanent basis, right? The idea that all of the world was part of a single economy. It wasn't quite globalized, but this was the first time that it happened. And this also is accompanied by the demographic holocaust. And again, we've also talked about this. This is right, the death of majority of Native Americans and coupled with the slave trade. And how does that connect? Well, as Europeans took over the New World and wanted to exploit its resources, they needed labor. Labor to run the plantations, to run the farms, to work in the mines. But as we've talked about, right, the Native American population dramatically reduced because of disease. So the need for labor led to the slave trade. One of the main reasons that the African slave trade existed was to bring labor to the New World. The Native Americans were not able to provide it because, quite simply, they were dead, right? The other major component of this is the biotic exchange of crops and livestock. So cows, pigs, wheat, these are all plants and animals that did not exist in America before the Europeans brought them. A great example is horses. Horses are not from the Americas. They're from Europe. They're from Asia. And they were brought here by the Spanish and the English and the French. It's hard to imagine Native Americans in the United States. Many of us watched these movies as kids, where the cowboys and Indians movies. Everyone's on a horse. Well, before 1492, there were no horses for the Native Americans, so that's a complete change. And then going back the other way, the idea of tobacco and corn and the potato and the pepper. These are all things that are native to the Americas. There was no tobacco or peppers anywhere else in the world before 1492. And so try to imagine the cuisine of India or China without hot, spicy peppers. So these have huge changes. The second wave of globalization begins roughly 1850 and lasts till the 1970s. And this is where we start seeing a truly economic or truly global economy. And this also is the rise of the core periphery system that we talked about. The economies of Europe expand and basically take over the world. And this was aided by a few things. The ability to move money easily, so laws, tariffs, laws that would restrict trade. In other words, if you have a tariff on Japanese cars in the United States, that means that cars made in Japan have to pay an extra tax to be sold here. It makes it more competitive and it makes it easier for American industry to survive. But with low tariffs, you can have increasing trade, which also lets you use labor in other countries. So, for instance, if it costs more money to make a car in Mexico than the United States, then people are going to buy American-made cars. But if it's just as affordable to make the car in Mexico because of low tariffs, but Mexican workers will take half as much money, that allows companies to move their factories to Mexico and use international labor, which is usually less expensive. It also allows them to buy or invest in factories in other countries. And this is what they call free trade or fair trade. And I want to point out that fair trade is neither free nor fair because it tends to favor those who have the power, the core, at the expense of the periphery. And in this whole movement between the 1860s and 1870s, the globalization centered mainly on London. The British Empire from 1865 to 1950 was the largest empire in the world. At one point, they controlled 20% of all the world, so very large, and London was the capital. The space-time convergences that made this happen were steamships, were railroads, and the telegraph. The telegraph is the original electronic communication. Before you had, voice communication with telephones, you had telegraphs, which sent electronic signals, dot, 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 dash, 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 which could be interpreted. We also had the building of global canals. So we talked about the Erie Canal in the United States, but there are two big canals that really changed this, the Suez and the Panama. The Suez Canal became basically the lifeline to India. So let me show you what that means. Over here is England, Europe, and this is India. India was the main part of the British Empire, where they got most of their raw material, most of their labor from. To go from India to England, you had to sail around Africa, a very long journey. It's very long. It's about 16,000 kilometers. I'm sorry, 1,600,000 kilometers, and a couple months. In the 1860s, they dug a 100-mile long canal right here that goes between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, and it was a shortcut. And now you basically could sail in 1/3 the time, much easier. And this was so important to England to get to India, they called it the British Lifeline. Conversely, the same thing happens here in the United States. To ship from New York to San Francisco before the railroad would take you 6 months to go all the way around South America. But in 1914, to make it even faster, the United States funded the building of the Panama Canal, 50 miles right here between the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. And now, instead of taking a couple months, it took 3 days. So these two canals allowed trade to circulate faster and freer all over the world. This is what the Panama Canal looks like today. That may look familiar. That's that ship I showed you. Interestingly, when the canal was built in 1914, these canal locks were much smaller. This boat would not fit. So they rebuilt new ones that are twice as big that opened in 2016 to accommodate the increased size of these shipping containers. Now, with this second wave of globalization, we see a greater economic merging of the world. You start seeing products made in one part of the world being sold in another part of the world. You see political relationships develop across continents on a regular basis. And in this, think of the core periphery model. London was the core. London, New York, Paris. And the overseas territories, India, Africa, Asia, they were the periphery. Okay? It's also called the age of imperialism because with this, a lot of the core countries decided it was very vital to actually control territories economically, be the dominant partner, right? So England basically takes over India to control economically its products, its resources. It also saw the rise of the protection of home industries. So England was more than happy to trade with India for goods and trade because they controlled India, but they did not allow American goods to be sold in India or Europe. They controlled their own industry. And this runs all the way through World War I and World War II, which happens roughly in 1920. And that was the end of that. We're going to talk about the next section here, but this leads to where we are today. So I'm going to pause right here, and we'll come back with part 3 in just a moment.